And all right, welcome back, everyone, to Strange Planet Podcast. And for this week, in light of the Deadpool and Wolverine movie that just came out about 2 weeks ago, that is the highest rating R film out ever, actually, where we stand now. We're going to be talking about comic book movies, and we're going to be talking about even there's some time towards the end, some video game adaptations to movies and shows as well. But I am going to lead off talking mainly about the Deadpool and Wolverine movie. I'm not going to say too much because I don't think everybody here actually had seen it yet. But make sure you do get your ass out there and watch that fucking movie because it is by far one of the funniest movies I think I've ever seen ever. There's tons of cameos. There's nothing wrong with it at all, and it's kind of steering the ship in another direction, which is pretty cool. And I'm not sure if everybody even in here saw the original, the first two, but this somehow they did it again, and it's better than the last two, I think, as well. What do you guys have to say about any of this? I guess before I continue on.
Well, me and Rook haven't seen the movie. I have seen some clips and snippets of stuff, and I'm actually excited to actually go see it.
It's worth it.
There is a few cameos I'm especially excited to see.
That's one of the best parts about it.
One in particular that everyone seems to be thinking about, I'm sure. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be a good movie to see. I've heard great things about it, and I'm excited. I'm definitely going to see it. And maybe next week I'll mention anything if we do talk about this again next week.
Yeah, it's a possibility. And I don't want to say too much about it. I was going to say more earlier, but I don't want to leak spoilers and stuff, so I'm not going to go into too much depth about it. But there is a ton of surprises that are not seen in the trailers. So, you know what I mean? They did do a good portion of kind of, even in the later, more recent trailers that came out. I think they leaked a few unfamiliar. Oh, well, I shouldn't say unfamiliar. They were familiar faces from the past. But you know what I mean? There's still a hell of a lot more within it when you watch it. But between that and the Fox jokes, and there's just so much to it. You know what I mean? And trust me, it will not disappoint. It is by far probably the best movie I've seen this year. And I don't see really anything topping this. And I guess moving forward away from this for a moment, there is a series of upcoming movies that are coming out too. And I figure we can maybe even touch base a little bit on that because everybody knows that the last phase of the Marvel universe there, I mean, I thought it was hit and miss. You had to watch them all for your own, viewing, and then, you critique yourself on what you like and what you don't like. But, there was a few that maybe weren't so good, but I think generally as a whole, it was pretty good. But upcoming, there is another Captain America coming out where I guess the Falcon is taking over, and there's a trailer out for that if you guys haven't seen that yet. And yeah, there's a couple of little surprises in that one as well. And the Fantastic Four is apparently making its comeback. Apparently, the movie is going to take place in the 1960s, if I read this correctly. So it's going to be very old-fashioned style. And yeah, I feel like they got the casting right. It looks like the main four are looking good because I don't know if any of you viewers at home saw the one that came out in 2015, but that was probably one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It was just terrible. The ones from the early 2000s, those were actually pretty good with Jessica Alba. I think everybody in here saw them at least, right? Those were pretty good, I thought, but those were actually better than the one in 2015. So I think we're just doing a good job of trying to forget that even existed. And yeah, they're moving forward with this new set. Pedro Pascal from The Last of Us, which I'm sure some of you, I think everybody here saw that. That is, he's Mr. Fantastic, so I can see that looking pretty good. And the rest of the lineup looked pretty good too. So there's, I guess there's that for the moment as far as where the MCU's going further, where it stands now. Definitely seems like it's going back to its original roots. What do you guys think?
Well, I mean, movies for comic books and video games have had a very shaky history. I mean, back in our day, we had good movies like, Mortal Kombat, even though Mortal Kombat was kind of like a mid. Ninja Turtles was great when that came out, but then we had the stinkers like Mario Brothers and
Doom. That was a little later.
Doom was a stinker, but the last 5 minutes of that movie Well,
made
not the
up
last
for it.
5 minutes, but the first person view of that movie
Yeah,
was
yeah, I know
definitely
what you're
good.
talking about. The 7 minutes of
So
that.
yeah, I mean, you could have did the whole movie like that. We would have been like, ah,
Right? Or more of that maybe would have sold, but
yeah.
it was
I mean,
pretty
I
lousy.
love Carl Urban in like almost everything he does, so I kind of was rooting for him in that. But then the movie was just kind of like, eh.
Yeah, it just didn't have it. You know what I mean? It just and it drifted from the game. I mean, I don't think I even really played that one, so I couldn't really compare it. I don't know, maybe I did. I don't remember. But
I
like,
mean,
yeah, it was
the storyline behind that is not as deep as something as like Halo or something like that. You have this one dude who supposedly is like uh the destroyer of hell, so he can go down into hell and defeat all these monsters and whatnot. So it definitely was open for interpretation, and I think they did a decent job with that. But then he threw the Rock in it, and the Rock is just cheesy.
yeah, it doesn't work. I feel like he's not that good for these things. I kind of hear you there.
Yeah,
It just
I mean,
doesn't.
there's some things he's good for, like Jumanji. Yeah, great, fine, but
Yeah,
this was a little.
exactly. Like that he was good in, and the whole crew wrapped around him too. Like
Yeah,
that was pretty well done. But yeah, him like did you see Black Adam?
I did not.
You didn't
I
miss much. I can tell you
Yeah,
uh,
I
that.
didn't see Black Adam
You
either.
didn't see it either?
I wanted to, but didn't make it to see it.
He's got three facial features or expressions throughout the entire movie. That's it. Like it's ridiculous, bro. But you were gonna say,
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, I
I
mean,
wanted. Oh, go ahead.
hey, go ahead.
I mean, yeah. When it comes to video game movies, it's casting that definitely does it, but the writing also has to back it up because you'll get good movies that'll come out like Aquaman was pretty good for that, but then
Yep.
the second movie wasn't as good,
Yeah.
and
Wasn't.
I think that was more marred over the whole Amber Heard thing, but at the same time, like take something that's off the cuff, like Ghostbusters. The Paul Feig Ghostbusters was a disaster because they mismanaged the advertising for that, claiming it was going to be a sequel when it was a remake.
Right,
Then
right.
they had the Four Girls, which wasn't bad had they passed the torches from the original Ghostbusters to them.
Yeah, and you
Then it
just
made
put a name
like
on it.
yeah, and then they didn't do the genre right. It was supposed to be a horror movie first with some comic relief through it, and they just made it all about comedy, and
Yep.
all the friggin' horror at that point means nothing. You got a monster on your back and someone's taking selfies. Yeah, okay, so I'm out. Yeah,
Right. It kind of reminds you of Scary Movie. Like
yeah,
right.
exactly. It was like a parody of Ghostbusters and not actually
Yeah,
Ghostbusters.
it didn't feel like the originals. And I'll say the new ones that came out actually were I didn't see the newest one, the Ice or whatever the hell it was called. I forget what
I
it's
want to
called.
see that too, but
But
I don't have the first one available to watch, so I got to
yeah,
wait for
the
that to be
first one was
available.
good. I can say that when they
Okay,
brought it like full circle and came back with like the original
Paul
cast
Rudd, right?
years later. Paul Rudd was in it. Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
he was in that was pretty good. And they made another one connected to that, but that one I didn't see yet. I'm planning on it, but I didn't get a chance to yet. But it looked good. I'm
Okay.
not gonna lie. Because the interesting thing that we're even talking about this, and this is the reason why we're bringing it up, is this is like the first time in, well, I mean, granted, the past, 10, 15 years or so, that the technology is really there to make all of this even happen. Because this is the
Yeah.
reason why we really didn't see a lot of this, prior to that. So now with all this technology increase and all these video games and comic books, coming to light, it's selling like wildfire for the most part. So I
Mhm.
don't really see it, diminishing anytime soon. And if anything, you're going to probably be seeing more of them. Like, for example, I think next month they're making a Borderlands movie. And I'm not going to lie, I saw the trailer. I'll probably check it out. It looks pretty good. Not going to lie. Like, I'm, a little cloudy on the whole story behind it and everything. But it's from the trailer alone, it looks like you may not really need to have played it. Just, familiar. It'll be more familiar if you did. But I think it's looking pretty good overall. You know what I mean? And like I
Mm.
think a couple of months back we talked about like shows like The Last of Us, and that was perfectly done from what I saw. And I know nothing of the game, so I remember Rook was big on that one, so he knows probably a good portion of the real meat of the message there. And I guess to add another one to this conversation would be the new Fallout one that came out like a month or two ago, maybe a little
Yeah.
longer. I forget. I don't know if anybody in here saw that one, but
Oh, I
there
definitely
was
did.
another
Yeah.
one phenomenal. I thought it was really good how they did it. It paid a lot of homage to the games, and it like, you know what I mean? Just the whole way they did it was just smart because it wasn't like based on a game specifically. It was just based on that
Mm.
realm, you know what I mean, of everything that goes on from within it, like the post-apocalyptic thing, you know what I mean, and all that kind of shit. And then all the props and all the other stuff was included as well. So it kind of it hit home. I feel like they did a good job, and I can see that, you know, quite a few seasons coming as long as, you know, I mean, the writing's there at least. You know,
Mm.
you saw it. I mean, what'd you think of that one?
What, The Last of Us or the
Fallout.
Fallout? Oh, I thought it was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I feel when it comes to TV series versus movies is you can build the backstory for a lot of this stuff in TV series that you can't really do in movies because it
Right.
takes too much time to really get invested in three characters of all to really follow their storyline to where it leads them. And sometimes movies do pretty good at that. I'm kind of iffy on the Borderlands one. I don't know if it's going to do it complete justice, but we'll have to see.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
it
off to
could
a good
do.
start.
Yeah, it could be a nice kickoff to setting a good foundation moving on. But I don't know. I feel like the TV series have been really killing it these last like 5 years or so. Because you had The Mandalorian that did great.
Yep.
You
That was
had
another good one.
The Last of Us, which was amazing. Fallout was really good. So I felt like being able to really build upon the storyline and the lore of all these games, and at least keeping it within the confines of what the game is itself, instead of going off cuff like they did with Ghostbusters. I
Right.
really feel
Right.
like they're having a winning recipe for that right now,
Yeah.
and I could only see good things in the future. But I mean, I almost feel like it's getting a little oversaturated,
It
because
is
I've
a little bit. It is.
like the Acolyte and um what the heck's her name? She did Ahsoka
Oh,
and all
Ahsoka.
those were
Right. Right. Right.
yeah. I felt
Forgot
like
about
those were
that one.
great, but I don't know if those are coming back now because I guess they didn't do good enough.
I don't know details yet, but as far as what I did hear, like a couple of weeks ago,
Hmm.
Ahsoka is supposed to come back, and that other one, not the
Acolyte.
Yeah, Acolyte. That one's supposed to. I think. I mean. Granted, I'm not going to say anything about the show for those, you know, the people that didn't see it. But I just kind of feel like the way that ended, there has to be another season. You can't leave it that way. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? I kind of like the whole show itself. I was a little iffy watching it, but I kept going. I was like, let me just see what'll happen. And then the last episode kind of brought the whole thing home, and I thought it made everything make a lot more sense. You know what I mean? So, but also the way it ended, I felt like the door was left wide open. You know what I mean? Like it. So like I kind of feel like there has to be a sequel to that. Otherwise, that's a hell of a cliffhanger to just walk away from. You know, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So you'll know when you see it if you haven't seen
but
it yet. I'm not going to
it's
say
not like
anything
they
about it,
haven't done stuff like that before,
but
unfortunately, where
yeah,
they'll just leave it
that's
hanging,
very
and the
true.
next thing you know, no movie.
Yeah, pretty much. But one thing you said that also makes a lot of sense is the fact that the shows, because you figure, I mean, the way things are now, they're anywhere from like what, 8 to maybe 10, at most 12 episodes. So you
Yeah.
figure that's at a maximum if they're, say, an hour a piece. You're looking at 8 to 12 hours, maybe if they're 45, a little less a piece, you know,
Yep.
opposed to making a movie, which is at most what, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, maybe, or something. So it allows them to kind of create and elaborate a lot more. And that's where the story and the character building and, you know what I mean? All that stuff kind of comes into play there. So that's why if they're making movies on it, they have to kind of consolidate it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Opposed to a show, you can kind of, you know what I mean, give you pieces as it goes on and makes it a little interesting. It's a different approach to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that kind of worked. You know what I mean? Like I think either which
I was
way.
gonna say,
Go ahead.
that's why a lot of times people say that the movies aren't as good as the books.
Right,
When
right.
Yeah.
books can take forever to develop characters, and they can do so in a lot more detail because you have the
Yep.
internal dialogue of those characters. And TV shows are somewhere in between those two. They
Mm.
can take longer to develop characters. You don't necessarily get that internal dialogue that you do in books, but you can still expound on, sort of those personal experiences and the day-to-day life of characters in a way that you don't really have the time to do that in movies
Right,
because you're
right.
just like going scene by scene, onto the next scene, onto the next scene. Whereas in shows, you sort of have, these plot development and character arcs that, sort of develop over the course of the season. And you don't necessarily need to have, some major plot points happening, every, few minutes. You can let that chill for a minute and focus on the characters.
Right. And I'm going to bring in light to that. I want to bring something else up. And I'm pretty sure we all saw Game of Thrones, right? I
Yeah.
think we all saw that in here. Now, I'm going to just say, from now that I brought it up, that was a phenomenal show until the last season. That last season, I felt like was rushed. They kind of fucked the whole thing up. The ending just didn't really do it for me. You know what I mean? But the reason I'm bringing this up is obviously the branch off show that's just ended its second, season, House of Dragon. I will say, if you guys haven't seen it, but you did watch Game of Thrones, give that show a try. It's a lot faster pace, and it's also very it cuts the bullshit. There's no boring parts or dragging on parts. You know what I mean? Like the first season alone moves so fast. I think by midpoint, they make like a 20, 30-year jump too. You know what I mean? So that shit hits the ground running. I did not see the season finale of season 2, which I believe was last Sunday. Sometime this week, maybe this weekend, I might actually finish it off and see how it ended or whatnot. But I will say, where this is going, it's pretty dope. I like it. You know what I mean? And I just hope it doesn't end the same way as Game of Thrones. But
So, as someone who hasn't seen House of Dragon, I have a question.
I have an
How does
answer,
it
maybe.
compare to Game of Thrones in terms of, the highlights of Game of Thrones? Like that was my favorite show for a long time.
Me too.
I was pissed when it ended. Even the last season was good. Yes, it was rushed, but it was still Game of Thrones. It was still good.
Right, like there was good fight scenes and stuff. Yeah, like that's true.
Right. I just thought the way it ended was just abrupt, and,
Yep.
and it rushed to change characters,
In one
namely
episode
Daenerys
too.
Targaryen, in a
Mhm.
way that felt unnatural and not. They didn't lay the foundation for her transition from, a hero to, a
Villain, say.
series.
Right.
Um,
This is
I
different than
think,
that.
yeah. But early on, especially with the seasons that were actually based on the books, you saw a lot of character development. Things took their time to develop. You didn't, obviously there were killings and, characters getting, off, but you didn't see this sort of rush to be like, oh well, this character is now evil. It was just very well put together in terms of how you had characters, you got to see them in their daily lives,
Right.
and it wasn't just based on plot and the plot having to move forward. So I'm wondering if House of Dragon goes back to that sort of, uh, foundational approach that the early seasons of Game of Thrones did,
I
that were
would
based on them.
I would say generally it does, but it is also very different because it's mainly based on just House Targaryen. And this
Right.
show is like, I think 200 or 300 years before Game of Thrones. So it's
So
basically
would
like
you
a
say
prequel.
it's like sort of smaller in scope in terms
Yeah.
of cast and the
Well,
locations?
the cast is still generally pretty big, but it's still mostly composed of just like House Targaryen at that time. And it's very dysfunctional. I can tell you that
Oh,
it's the most dysfunctional thing you'll
what
ever
was it
see.
that?
Yeah, you know what I mean? But the coolest part about it is, if you remember from Game of Thrones, the only people that really, have a relationship or can, own a dragon are the Targaryens. You know what I mean? So there is a very, very, fair amount of dragons throughout. You know what I mean? And then there's dragon fights and there's, what I mean? There's a whole bunch of shit that leads into that. I don't want to say too much,
Okay,
just
so
in case.
they get to the dragons a lot quicker than
Oh,
Game of
yes.
Thrones.
Yeah, the first episode alone, you'll probably see one or two. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah,
at
well,
that
you
point,
can understand why the original Game of Thrones took a while to get to that,
exactly,
because
there wasn't
it cost a lot of money to have CGI dragons in
true.
television,
But
so
if you
it's not like a
remember,
movie.
true. But if you remember in Game of Thrones, that by the time that's like shown, when that time period, was a thing, there wasn't many dragons left. There was only like three, I
Right,
think.
right,
So this is like 300 years before, and dragons are not as uncommon then as they were,
right.
300 years
So
later.
it may not even been possible to make this prequel show that, from a budget standpoint, because
Possibly.
if you had to have like dozens of dragons like every episode, like that might have been too costly for a show that was yet it was unproven,
Right. It was
and
still
now
building.
they're just like trying to uh, find an audience. Whereas House of Dragon, that probably brought a lot of the audience that Game of Thrones watchers and other people who heard about the show, know about Game of Thrones at least, and wanted to follow it.
Right.
Whereas Game of Thrones came out, like any show, like Breaking Bad, it started out slowly, and then by word of mouth, it started
Became
gaining
huge.
traction.
Yeah, it's very true. I will say that this show, like, I didn't read the books actually for this, but I have a friend of mine that did, and he said generally so far, like the way they're going now, granted with these kind of books too, the character list is enormous, so there's no way they're gonna fit everybody. Like even Game of Thrones, from what I've read so far, which is only about half, left so many characters out. But I mean, you can't include everybody; it's impossible. So this show kind of did that same thing, but the interesting thing is, it from what I'm hearing, as to where it stands now, it's pretty accurate. You know what I mean? I guess there might be some missing characters and stuff, but generally, the events and everything that's going on, it's pretty close to the book from what I've heard people that read the book say. And one of my friends already read all of them, so I mean, he was saying that so far it's looking pretty good. Now I don't know about how season 2 ended, if it did, because I didn't watch it yet, so I'm not speaking on that. I'm just speaking on what I saw so far, which is the whole first, basically everything up until that point, just until last week. I didn't get around to it yet. But I will definitely say it's 100% worth watching, especially if you saw Game of Thrones. If you were a fan of Game of Thrones, you'll like this show, I think. You know what I mean? It's a new roster, it's new people. You got to get used to the names, which are a little wacky. And some of the people's names are almost like the same name, just missing a letter. You know what I mean? There's like Damon and Diamond. There's so many weird names that even sound the same, just to fuck with you and make it more confusing. But you know what I mean? Generally, I like where it's going. But they did announce and say that season 4 will end this. So there's only 2 more seasons coming. And then I guess they're gonna take another stroll to another book or series or something. So yeah, I think House of Dragons is gonna end at 4 seasons. Or so I'm hearing so far, at least. You know what I mean? And I know you guys haven't seen it, but if you saw Game of Thrones, give it a try. I think you'll like it. You know?
Well, speaking on that, um, I always thought that when it comes to movies, Marvel does it the best.
I agree.
But when it comes to animated stuff, DC does it really well too.
So I'm hearing. Yeah, so I'm hearing.
So apparently, the Batman Cape Crusader, which I believe is the new animated Batman series that's out, same animators as the Batman from the early 2000s, which was phenomenal. Mark Hamill as the Joker, and what's his name as Batman? I forget his
Kevin
name.
Conroy, I think.
Kevin Conroy. Yeah,
Yeah,
he
rest
died.
in peace. Yeah.
Yeah, but like, they were phenomenal together as Batman and the Joker, and I would love to have that chemistry back, even though we can't. But apparently, this show is doing great, so I'm excited to check that out at one point. And it's always funny to me how, when it comes to DC versus Marvel, Marvel seems to win all the time. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's like DC only has Superman and Batman, and how many times are we going to do
Right.
Batman before we get sick of him?
That's
And
very
Superman,
true.
I feel like Superman we're already sick of, because
Yeah, Christ, they've been doing that for decades now.
for almost 100 years, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
pretty
But
much.
like,
Yeah.
it's just when you look at what they're trying to do with the movie wise, when it comes to those two franchises, it's just Marvel characters have more depth.
Yep.
They're not one dimensional characters, and I don't know if that's Stan Lee's doing or if it's just the way the writers are writing it. Because even you need good writing to have movies work out pretty good. Or maybe the DC should just start doing shows instead of actual movies. But then they did do that. They did the Gotham series with
Yep.
young Bruce Wayne, and that
And I
did
was
okay.
yeah, like I
Yeah, it
saw a
was
few seasons, but I fell off. Yeah, I fell
I
off
felt, you
that.
know what it felt like? It felt like Batman Kid version.
Yeah,
Where you
it,
had,
it was just something a little off about it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I eventually kind of after like maybe 3 seasons of that, I ended up losing interest. I don't really know why either. It just I don't know, it didn't stick to the wall, you know?
yeah, it wasn't interesting enough, you know?
Yeah. Because one thing Batman series does have, I guess, under the DC realm, is they do have very intricate villains, just like Spider-Man
Yeah.
does in a
That's
sense
like
too.
it's like
You
DC
know?
almost has the best villains, whereas Marvel has the best heroes.
Yeah, just the only problem is we've seen so much of that. I think that's the reason why Marvel's just been taking over these past like 20 years. Because
Yeah.
like prior to that, we didn't get any of it. There wasn't any of those kind of movies, period. You know what I mean? Because just you
Yeah.
couldn't do it where it was believable enough, you know? So now you're getting like an onslaught. But the smartest thing about how they did it was they managed to put a story, you know, wrap around the whole thing and include everybody in the tent. You know what I mean? So by doing that,
Yeah.
it makes it even more interesting because, you know, I think they're going to be drifting away from like origin stories now. We're just going to, you know, hit the ground running and keep moving from where they're at. So you won't be seeing probably too much more of that. But you know what I mean?
I
Like
I,
the
I think they're gonna start going away from the Avengers end of it because with Tony Stark dead and the rest of the Avengers kind of spread all over the place. I think they're going to start leaning
yeah,
into the X-Men franchise
you're
at this
right. The
point.
mutants and shit. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think they're going
and
to
that
start.
that
Yep.
will go a long way if they do it correctly. And
Hmm.
so far with Deadpool and Wolverine, there's like the beginnings of that.
Yep.
It looks good so far.
Oh yeah, that's off to a great start. And like
Yeah,
I
even
said
the guy that
earlier,
plays Colossus, I love him. It's friggin' he's awesome.
yeah, and that's the thing too, because there's just so damn many of them too. You know what I mean? So like the movies could be endless. DC has
Yeah,
more of a tighter, you know what I mean, reach when it comes to
yeah,
variety.
it has
You
a
know?
shorter roster.
Yeah, it's just
Like
not as
you look
many.
at
You know?
just the X-Men themselves, and you have more of a roster than the whole DC universe.
Probably, yeah, and that's just one, you know, subdivision of, you know, like hundreds. It seems. You know what I mean?
So
So,
let me ask you guys, when it comes to the Marvel movies, what would you be most excited to hear coming out?
well, besides Deadpool and Wolverine, uh, I guess I'll go ahead on a limb and say that that new Fantastic Four movie, I want to see
Ooh,
that succeed. I do
okay, I
because, like,
agree. I would
yeah,
love
you
to
know
see
what I
the
mean.
Fantastic Four go somewhere.
And I'm hearing rumors that Galactus is going to be the villain, and no one's seen him on screen. Well, I mean, technically, in the 2000 version, there was a scene with him in it, but he was appeared as a like a big
Wasn't that
smoke
like the Silver
monster.
Surfer
Like,
movie?
was that?
Wasn't that the Silver Surfer movie?
Oh, that might have been the second one. You're right, because Doom was in the first. Yeah, you're right. That might have
Yeah,
been the second one. Yeah, you know what I mean? So I want to see that do good mainly because the one in 2015 was so horrible. I feel like they deserve better. But now we got
we
it.
all
I'm
do.
telling you, I think they got it this time and they got it right. Not that the 2000s were bad. I kind of felt like that was like we were saying earlier, even in pre-show, that
Yeah,
like
but
the Jessica
I felt
Alba
like
and the
that movie
Chris
was
Evans,
slapped together. Yeah,
like those were good. I'm not gonna lie for what it was, you know, but that's not really included into what they're doing now with this. But
yeah,
this new movie coming out definitely is. So this is introducing them, but they're not, you know, just gonna go away after this. They're gonna be mixed in with the rest. And you
fingers
know what I
crossed.
mean?
It's
And
good.
yeah, you know what I mean? So that's my take on it. And the new Captain America, I feel like that one's gonna be pretty dope with that little ending clip of Red Hulk, which once again is another person you never saw yet. They've been kind of building up towards that. So
Yeah.
now we're finally going to see that too, you know?
What about you, Rook? What are you most excited to see hopefully come from the MCU?
Well, I'm really excited to see some more X Men. You know, we haven't seen. I mean, yeah, there have been X Men movies, but I feel like it's time to reboot. It's time to,
Hmm.
you know, bring out a whole, new generation of X Men that for the modern era for the modern Marvel era, which
Mm.
has grown leaps and bounds in terms of quality and what we expect from superhero movies. I would honestly like to see some uh, sort of like what they did with um, Netflix Marvel. I would like to see some of that, perhaps with X-Men characters.
That'd be cool.
Sort of
Mm.
Yeah.
exploring, characters more in depth in a long format that
Mm.
could potentially, you could have, a show about Cyclops and maybe it could be like young Cyclops. Maybe the characters are young Rogue.
Yeah.
Those characters could be very intriguing at a young age, and seeing how they adapt to their powers, and seeing how maybe they were ostracized by their peers, that sort of thing, how they live their daily lives. I think modeling it after the Marvel Netflix shows, and making it for perhaps a more mature audience.
Right.
I
Right.
think that might, do a good service. We had Logan, which was, a very mature movie. And so,
Oh yeah, and that was gory too.
yeah. And so I think that when you have, um, I just really appreciate the maturity that the Marvel Netflix show brought to superheroes. They're
I
not
agree.
just they're not just characters that are all powerful and flawless. And I think X-Men is perfect for that, because you have characters that are sort of ostracized by society.
Hmm.
So you have the perfect opportunity to explore how society impacts individual characters. Um, like Rogue, for instance, I think is the perfect character to start off with, perhaps, because she is just someone that can't interact with people, and I think that would be the perfect vehicle to explore a more mature X-Men story. Of course, um, it doesn't have to be exactly the same formula as the Marvel Netflix shows,
Right. Right.
but I think they should definitely take inspiration from that.
Right.
And they have the Disney Plus service, so I think just try it out, see what works.
I
Start
agree.
off with one show, maybe Rogue, and go from there.
One thing I think you're going to be very happy about is I think it's slated for next year, but I'm not 100% sure. But they're continuing the Daredevil series. That's supposed to be still coming out.
Right, right.
And
I'm looking forward to that.
the great thing about that is, believe it or not, from what I'm hearing right now, because it's been years later now, the entire cast of not only that show but all of them is coming back too, I think.
Oh,
Good,
awesome.
good.
Yeah, so I feel like
Jessica
that's
Jones, Luke
yeah.
Cage.
Did
Yeah,
such a good
Jessica
everyone
Jones.
that
Yep.
played those roles did a good job. So
The
I'm happy about
Punisher,
that.
a majority of them are supposed to cameo in just his show alone. You know what I mean? So I bet you're going to see him trickle in movies, and I mean, they're going to be around. I think that's going to be good. And from what it looks like, they want to keep that mature route with it, which I think they fucking better, to be honest.
Nice.
Because like last year they were supposed to drop it, but Feige, the guy that's
Right,
behind it, he wasn't happy with the way it was looking, so he had them redo it. So that's
Hmm.
interesting, you know what I mean? So now it's slated for next year, I think. And yeah, it's supposed to be like a continuation from what they started on the Netflix. So yeah, well, only time will tell, I guess.
Okay.
I believe
So
Mark, you wanted to answer your question there.
yeah, before I reveal my pick, I just want to say one thing. I think Rogue is going to be the next way they go, because you know how she gets her powers, other than like the touch power. She doesn't have fly out the gate. She takes that from Miss Marvel.
I heard about that. That is true, ain't it?
Yeah, so that's going to be
Yep.
an interesting scene to see that with her around. But my pick that I'd love to see is Ghost Rider.
That's dope. Yep.
Yeah, that's going to be like Marvel's Batman because it's fucking super awesome. But
That would be cool.
I liked the first Nicolas Cage movie. It was okay. The second one got a little weird. It went a little more Nicolas Cage than
Yeah, I
it
hear
was
you.
Ghost Rider. But I mean, I would love to see them reboot that and do a really good job, especially with the technology I have these days.
Yep.
That I think would be killer.
The only thing I will say on a different note is that I'm trying to say this without saying too much, but did you guys see the second Captain Marvel?
No.
I'm not gonna lie, it got a bad rap, but honestly, I've seen worse. That Fantastic Four reboot in 2015 was much worse than that movie. You know what I mean? So like I would recommend watching it, at least see it for
It's a
yourself.
very low bar.
But that's a low bar, right? So that's also not
Yeah.
not a good comparison, I guess.
Not
But
as
honestly,
low
I
as the
didn't think it
Mario
was
Brothers
that bad.
movie, but it's low.
Yeah. But the reason why I'm bringing it up is there was a post-credit scene that was arguably better than the whole movie. But
Oh god.
I'm not going to say who or what it was. But what I will say is where that post-credit scene took place is in the same universe as Deadpool 3, Deadpool and Wolverine. So remember that. Yeah, it's very interesting. I actually read that recently. That's in the same, I guess, universe. So someone shows up. That's all I'll say. And then I guess that will connect to this movie maybe down the line at some point. You know what I mean?
Cool.
So it's very interesting. I'm interested to see where this is going to go. And all right, everyone, I guess that's all we got for this week. That was your dose of comic and video game movies for now. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Make sure you watch Deadpool and Wolverine. It is a phenomenal movie. And we will see you next week. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Peace.